Today's talk focuses on the Model 3 goods and bads, as well as comments made by Steve Wozniak, formerly of Apple, as well as the fact that I believe that the Model 3 is a monster that will destroy a lot of other vehicles. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks for taking time out once again. If this is your first time on our channel, please take time to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss anything. If you're returning, welcome back. We had a chance here in Washington, D.C. to get exposure to the new Model 3, and I wanted to sort of introduce some of what was learned. I put kind of fraud on the front, and the reason was that I think I'm sort of shocked. The car is, I believe, a bit misunderstood, and that I believe it's a monster that is a real game changer in cars. I also think that it potentially destroys the Model 3 in the process, or the Model S in the process, because it's so close. So I wanted to point out, first of all, that I'm going to put photos in. You'll notice that the photos that I've chosen to include sort of over my shoulder and behind me sort of are all over the car, perhaps looking at angles that other people have not covered thus far, which is hard to believe given how heavily covered the car has been completely. I was introduced to car vehicle photography by a professional photographer maybe 15 years ago. And what he shared was the way that most vehicles are handled is there's a process where the photographer will start taking pictures in a circle around the car on a continuous circle moving up a foot at a time. So as a result, you get angles of the vehicle going around that you won't necessarily see usually. This enables you to sort of get different perspectives on and ideas on what was going on that vehicle that you may miss otherwise. They then put all those pictures on a board to kind of see what the deal is. And I found it kind of interesting because I did some exterior shots, but half of my shots were from inside the car. And I thought it was interesting that if you're an owner user, most of your views of the vehicle are going to be from inside out, not outside in. So I thought the internal sort of photos were kind of interesting. Among the most interesting of the photos, I thought, were a look at the sub area for the trunk that one can store without people being able to see. I also thought the images of the glass roof and under the pillar were kind of different and kind of interesting in terms of taking a look at it. I took a picture of the rear-facing camera so that you could see how, you could set the images up on the screen so you can see things behind you. Another thing I didn't take a picture of, time wasn't available, was a 60-40 split on the seats. I do some skiing, and having a pass-through for skis wasn't there, but they do have the 60-40 split, so you can have larger items sort of come through the seat in that regard. So my overall on the vehicle, while I didn't get to drive it, I don't think the driving side is that big a deal because I think Tesla's established its performance reputation between the Model 3 and Model S and Model X. So why do I call this car a fraud? Well, I call it a fraud because Tesla really worked hard to avoid creating a vehicle that would destroy the marketplace for the Model S. And I kind of feel like they did a bad job. And the reason I say that is that when you think about it, the big shocker of the day is in the U.S. and maybe where you live, we have something called Subway, and they have a sandwich called a foot long. So it's a 12-inch long sandwich. In the case of the Model 3, the car is actually 4 inches narrower and 12 inches shorter than the Model S. Now, I found it interesting because while it has that shortness, the rear profile of the vehicle, which is where I took several shots, is actually taller. And I thought this was kind of interesting because for a taller person, when you have to put objects like grocery bags, etc., in the trunk, having a higher level in the back is actually really useful because now like a dog can stand up back there. You can move objects in and out without having to stoop over or duck underneath a lip, as you will in the S. So I actually think the form factor for the trunk area is actually perhaps better than the S. So this is one of sort of several things that I've noticed about the vehicle. And based on the fact that it's almost the same size as the S, it'll go 300 miles. It won't perform as well and has less storage space. I think that, this is a great vehicle. And as we go into the more, tricked out in terms of multiple motors and other features that are currently not available, I think this vehicle will end up being very destructive to the maintaining market share for the Model S. But one would expect that eventually they'll have to refresh and figure out how to reconfigure the S so it can ride on its own, because the Model 3 is such a great car in many ways that it's going to make it hard. Another surprise that I found in the Model 3 was I call the SUV capabilities. So if you look at the car, you'd say, oh, it's a nice little Model 3, whatever. But the strangest thing is if you look at the rear of the car, and I'll make sure that the photo's there with the hatch open, you'd swear that this car was really an SUV. The only thing that limits it from being that is that they've made a point of low profile. That is, the distance between the wheel and the frame of the car is kind of narrow. So if in fact you pay off your 3, I would seriously consider adding new sort of shock absorbers or all of the stuff that allows the height of the vehicle to ride, because you could easily end up with a vehicle that's about 4 or 5 inches taller. Might hurt your aero a little bit, but it gives you the kind of clearance that a large snow tire is in there. It allows the vehicle to sort of sit on the road at a higher level, and I think it might work better for people with some height. So I think that this vehicle has a lot more flexibility than I thought it would, and it is really set up to serve the needs of a bunch of different folks. Speaking of folks that it needs to serve, what about tall people? I'm 6'3", so I'm really interested in how a vehicle sort of sits for a taller person. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by the fact that the back seat, because of how the roof works, gives plenty of headroom to comfortably sit back there without having to stoop over if you're a tall person. So I also thought this was really impressive. Kind of included a photo with this, but it's more likely you'll see it once you get a chance to sit in it, how this portion of things work. The next thing I wanted to cover, well, for me, the surprise list was limited. Was limited by the fact that I got 15 minutes in the car and to talk with other folks about how it all works. Another surprise that I saw, which I liked, was USB ports for the rear seat passengers. Now have rear-facing USB plugs that allow access to power, so those in the rear seats can access their devices to play games or whatever it might be. There's actually a 12-volt plug in the glove compartment up front, but a little bit more cumbersome to get that comfortably back to the rear seat passengers. But it was nice to see those rear seat plugs. Is really cool, and I don't believe they were there previously, but Tesla has really responded, and I'm impressed by their effort to do so. The final thing that I would say is that, as a surprise, and I think this sucker is really a monster, is the fact that the new Model 3 is 3,500 to 4,000 pounds. It goes 300 miles. As you know, the Model S and X are 6,000 pounds plus, going the same range. And so I think that's another sort of under-the-hood monster aspect of the Model 3 to consider. You can basically have a lighter car that goes a longer distance, and that's great. And then the final sort of monster item of the car that I'd like to mention is the fact that with the new battery, I'm expecting the cold weather performance to be much better, because there's a reliance on the charging process for the battery is different, and I believe will operate better in colder temperatures than we've seen with Model S and X, which operate with a different type of battery. So there are a number of interesting surprises. I've listed some on the sheet that you'll see there. Overall, I would say once this car stabilizes, the 1 foot difference that's Model S to Model 3, I don't think you'll notice that at all. I suppose the screen issues you might notice until you get comfortable with the single screen in the middle. I was noting how they were trying to reduce functionality a little bit to make it harder for people to move from the S to the Model 3. But if you add some storage to this vehicle from one of the aftermarket companies that's selling Tesla products, I don't think you'll miss this the Model S at all, unless you're a high performance guy. If you're a regular driver, I think that the Model 3 is a better value once all the software bugs are worked out. Now, let me switch over to a quote just came out from Steve Wozniak, who was one of the co-founders of Apple. And he is the owner of, I believe, 3 Teslas, 2 Model S's, and maybe a Model X. And he also owns a Chevy Bolt. He pointed out he's no longer going to trust Elon Musk, and he's primarily focused on the fact that all the promises made about the autopilot have not come true, and therefore he's not going to trust Elon Musk when he says, oh, this is great and works. Now, as you all know, I've done posts on the fact that many owners have not seen the features that were claimed by Tesla working, and I think that, there's definitely a gripe that people can have about the functionality of Autopilot 1 versus 2, and Mobileye or not, and, how Tesla is handling this. They put a lot of money and time into it, but have not achieved the degree of success enjoyed by Mobileye. And, Mobileye's been at it for 20 years, and they've done a nice quality product. And I think Tesla has been at it for 3 or so years with great engineers. But software can be a different beast than building a piece of hardware. And it's proving to be more of a challenge than Elon Musk and company thought it would be. So I would say that, part of the game right now is if you're a Model 3 in the list, to keep an eye on the blogs out there about what's going on with the car. The current owners are experiencing issues that you want to be aware of. The factory is fixing them systematically. If you identify things as a professional that you think are important for them to fix, I think Elon and company are definitely open to doing so. So I think that there's a good working relationship between owners to help get beta information back to Tesla for repairs or fixes or retrofits, both hardware and software. So I think things can be addressed. So my final overall on this is that I think the Model 3, again, once it's worked out, this car is a monster. It's bigger, slightly bigger than than the BMW 3 Series. Obviously, we know the battery qualities, supercharger qualities that this brings. I really think this is the future of automobiles. I'm working on my Model 3 poem, so stay tuned for that. It's actually Thursday, the 1st of February. Just a reminder, we had technical difficulties last week, but we will have on Saturday at noon our at least a 1-hour session online. So if you're a subscriber, I look forward to interacting with you directly. Any comments or questions, please forward. This is a site where we love Tesla, but we will call it if stuff is not done well. So if you feel you hate Tesla, I don't think this is a great site for you, bottom line. But we're open to, addressing issues and comments shared. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Tschüss, macht's gut, au revoir, lehitraot, choda hafez, walk good man. And have a great day and look forward to our next conversation, which will focus on some of the challenges between Tesla and the Wall Street Journal and features that they will or won't show in advance to certain entities that's creating major issues.